anymore. Gosh.
Well, I've got tons of them. I've had a long life. I hope it will be longer.
Well, speaking of putting an age, one way to get injured is trying to keep up with someone 15 years younger than yourself, says one card on... final comment, James, 30 seconds. Just stay safe this season, and if there's one piece of advice, what is it?
The one piece of advice is whatever you're going to get into this Christmas and summer, have a hymn. That means think about it before you jump in, and that way you can be safe and keep doing what you love.
Good on you, James. Kia ora. That's James Whittaker from ACC. And Chris Wikaira, Julia Hartley-Moore, both of you stay safe. And have a great Christmas. Been a big year, huh?
Big year. You too, Robert.
Yeah, very good. Lovely to have you on. Really, really lovely show. Thank you so much.
Kanui te mihi.
Yeah, I'm Wallace Chapman. Back Monday, still here. Do tune in. Thanks to Charlie Drever for producing a Checkpoint next. Have a great weekend.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi awa Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, a group ventures onto Whakaari White Island to lay a memorial plaque despite the volcano officially being closed. Free cricket on a TV screen near you as Spark pulls the plug on its sports streaming service. 13 Rotorua motels get resource consent to keep operating as emergency housing. The eco-friendly bitumen gobbler recycling road seal, and counting the days, hours and minutes to your break. So where is everyone headed when it's wheels up? And how is the Christmas menu looking? All that tasty goodness comes with a hefty price tag at the moment. We've been crunching the numbers. You can watch us live, Sky Channel 83, Freeview Channel 50. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. A group of people have ventured onto the Whakaari White Island crater to lay a plaque remembering the 22 dead. They include eruption victims' family, at least one survivor and a helicopter operator who rescued people on the day. Photos show a group surrounding the plaque didn't wear hard hats or gas masks. Mark Inman, who lost his brother Hayden on the island, says the group had permission to visit and a safety plan in place.
It's just nice to be able to recognise those that were lost on it during the eruption and to recognise everybody, because there is no other sort of place of recognition at this stage.
Whakaari is at volcanic risk level 2, meaning heightened unrest. This is the same level as December the 9th, 2019, the day of the explosion. The Fiji military force commander has rejected a request to intervene in the dispute over the integrity of the election process following a request by opposition party leaders. Speaking to RNZ Pacific, Major General Chone Kalauniwai said the military force as an institution will put its trust in the electoral process. He says using the military in any form during the electoral process is unconstitutional. His statement comes after a group of opposition party leaders in Fiji called for a halt to vote counting on Thursday and demanded an audit of the country's electoral system. This was triggered by an anomaly in provisional results displayed on a Fiji election office results app on Wednesday night. The Council of Trade Unions says Aotearoa doesn't have the skills and expertise needed for the bursting pipeline of infrastructure projects. A report from the Infrastructure Commission, Te Waihanga, shows complex projects like motorways, road tunnels and underground rail are more expensive in New Zealand than elsewhere. It says that's partly because land, concrete and equipment are pricier here. But Council of Trade Unions economist Craig Rennie says New Zealand also has to rely on expensive overseas contractors.
We don't have a lot of companies, if any, who can actually undertake that work. We tend to import those companies as and when we need them. That's how we end up with overseas contractors building Transmission Gully, for example, or Italian contractors who are building the Central Interceptor in Auckland.
The report says the government must get better at long-term planning to help curb costs. A decision by independent commissioners relating to Rotorua's emergency housing situation has gone against the majority sentiment of locals who have submitted against resource consents for 13 motels to continue as emergency housing. The motels are allowed to continue to operate as emergency housing for another 2 years, but with added conditions. Rolly Rolston, who lived for 22 years in Rotorua before moving away due to safety concerns, says residents' concerns are being ignored. Meanwhile, the president of lobby group Restore Rotorua, Trevor Newbrook, says he's disappointed with the approvals but glad that the consent period has been reduced from 5 years to 2. Almost 4,000 submissions by Rotorua residents were made earlier, the majority opposing the resource consent applications. And job applications have increased for the 9th month in a row, according to figures just released. Seek New Zealand's employment report shows the number of advertised vacancies fell by nearly 8% in November, but was still nearly 30% higher than before the pandemic. Bill Hickman reports.
Seek New Zealand's country manager Rob Clark says the report is good news for employers and job seekers alike. He says employers had few options to choose from at the beginning of the year. Mr Clark says the growing number of applicants reflects increasing worker confidence and higher numbers of migrants. The hospitality and tourism sector is the top driver of job growth, while advertisements mentioning work from home options have ballooned by more than 12 times pre-pandemic levels.
In sport, the Black Caps could have different head coaches for different formats in the not-too-distant future. After confirmation yesterday, the captaincy will be shared with Tim Southey taking over the test reins from Kane Williamson. The prospect was raised of a similar split in the coaching roles. New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White says it's a discussion they're having with the team's sole head coach, Gary Stead.
Gary's current contract runs through to the Cricket World Cup in 23. But we have had conversations about that possibility in the future. I think it's something that might happen in the future. But like all things we do, we kind of discuss it as a group. It's not one person making a unilateral decision.
The Breakers coach, Modi Mayor, is confident they'll have enough players to travel to Brisbane for next week's NBL game against the Bullets despite COVID, forcing the postponement of tonight's game against the Wildcats in Perth. 7 players have the virus and are isolating in Auckland, while 3 players are out injured, meaning the Breakers couldn't field a team. Former Wimbledon champion Boris Becker has been released from prison in England after serving 8 months of his sentence for hiding $5 million worth of assets and loans to avoid paying debts. The 55-year-old was jailed for 2.5 years in April on insolvency charges. And British police have commended English football fans at the World Cup in Qatar after revealing none of them were arrested at the tournament. The final is on Monday morning between Argentina and France. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the psychedelic origins of Santa Claus and those flying reindeer, according to fungi expert Lawrence Millman, the producer who led Prince Andrew to that slaughter of an interview. And we'll talk best books of the year with Kate DeGoldie and Laura Croach. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile phone through the RNZ app. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday to kick off your weekend. Northland and Auckland, fine spells and isolated showers today. Cloudy tomorrow with rain at times. For the Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, cloudy with periods of rain or drizzle. Waikato to Manawatu, including the Central High Country, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Scattered showers and possible thunderstorms becoming isolated this evening. Widespread rain developing tomorrow with heavy falls. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also Marlborough and Nelson. Cloudy periods and a few showers, turning to rain tomorrow. Bulla, occasional rain today. Few showers developing late tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland, rain at times, possibly heavy. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain or showers, clearing for a time tonight and tomorrow morning. Thunderstorms and hail possible in the afternoons and evenings south of Ashburton. Low cloud or fog at times along the coast. And Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, low cloud and drizzle. The time is 7 minutes past 5. Our next news headlines and traffic news are at 5:20.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A group of nearly 20 people has ventured onto the closed Whakaari White Island crater to lay a plaque remembering the 22 people who died when the volcano erupted. The group included relatives of some victims, at least one survivor, and a helicopter operator who rescued people on the day, but who was also charged with health and safety breaches. In the photos of those on the island, no one is wearing hard hats or gas masks, and many are wearing jandals, including children. But a spokesman says the group had a safety plan in place and permission to go. Sam Ollie reports.
The island has been closed to visitors since it blew. The volcanic risk is at level 2, heightened unrest, the same as the day of the deadly explosion on December 9, 2019. But Mark Inman, the brother of killed tour guide Hayden Marshall Inman, says an exception was made for several trips to install the plaque on the island and unveil it this month.
Had it in plans for a long time. It's a fun right opportunity to get it out there. And it was fitting this year with the 3rd anniversary and the fact that a lot of international families could come over this year.
He says he's wanted to see a memorial at Whakaari since the tragedy.
It's just nice to be able to recognise those that were lost on it during the eruption and to recognise everybody, because there is no other sort of place of recognition at this stage.
Kahu Helicopters owner Mark Law was in the group at the plaque. He returned to the island to rescue survivors on the day of the explosion. He has since been honoured for bravery and is a finalist for New Zealander of the Year. His company is also among 12 parties denying charges of health and safety breaches leading up to the tragedy. Some of the charges the parties face are based on alleged inadequacies and absences of safety gear. While photos RNZ has seen don't show safety gear being used for the latest visit to unveil the plaque, Mr Inman says there were measures.
We had a safety plan in place and we followed it. It is what it is, and we've put it in place, and it's just nice to be able to recognise people there, rather than sort of trying to drag any health and safety or anything dramatic into it. Yeah, it's a memorial on the island that recognises those that were passed away.
Dr Pauroto Ngāropo, who has acted as a cultural advisor for mana whenua Ngāti Awa, says he gave the trip his blessing as a one-off for now.
So that they're never forgotten. Just imagine if there wasn't anything there 800 years from now, 500 years from now, possibly, that whole incident will be forgotten.
There is no consensus on the future of visits to the island. Dr Ngāropo is supportive of the idea in the long term.
We can't deny the opportunity for other generations to come. You know, we have a lot more scientific knowledge, Māori, Mātauranga Māori knowledge, and common sense knowledge. I think that, yes, I would support the idea.
When asked about the safety of the plaque unveiling, he said the visiting group, who had suffered greatly, knew how dangerous the island could be.
Level 2, level 2.5, level 1.9. Any risk factor really, whether it's at level 2 or whatever level, there's always going to be a risk.
GNS's monitoring equipment on the island needs major maintenance, but GNS has not taken scientists back there since the eruption, saying it is doing extensive planning to get a team safely on site, but no date has been set yet. RNZ has also contacted a survivor, New Zealand Police, the Department of Internal Affairs, a lawyer representing the island's owners, Kahu Helicopters, and the Ngāti Awa Runanga for comment.
Free-to-air cricket will return to New Zealand screens next year as Spark pulls the plug on its sports streaming service. It's blaming the escalating cost of content rights, COVID disruptions, and a failure to get enough eyeballs on screens just 3 years after launching. As part of an exit deal, TVNZ will become the home of cricket in Aotearoa from mid-next year, broadcasting Black Caps and White Ferns tests, T20 matches, and one-day internationals played on home turf along with Super Smash matches. The deal expires at the end of 2025-26 season. New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive Officer David White says it's good for the game.
I think it will significantly increase participation. I think it's going to make the game more accessible to all New Zealanders. For a number of years, cricket has been behind a paywall, and now all New Zealanders will be able to watch the game, and by watching it, hopefully they'll gain an interest and play the game.
And that was David White from New Zealand Cricket. Now joining us is technology commentator Peter Griffin. Kia ora, Peter. Sports streaming, too hard basket, is it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is really, the end of Spark's foray into trying to do content. Obviously, they had Lightbox, which was more about entertainment content. They got out of that game. That actually was sold to Sky TV. And now they're exiting Spark Sport as well. So giving up on sport, which is super expensive to play in. We've seen a lot of telecoms operators around the world try and get into the content game and realize very quickly just how expensive it is, particularly those sports auctions to get the crucial rights to screen some of these games. So a big win for Sky ultimately, because they have the Rugby World Cup. They announced today the Formula One. Eventually they'll go after cricket as well. And while in the short term it's good for consumers because we get to watch the cricket on our public broadcaster, whether TVNZ has the will and the money, particularly as it moves more towards the merger with RNZ, to actually go after sports events on an ongoing basis is doubtful. I think Sky will mop it all up as they did for the best part of 20 years.
Yeah, interesting that New Zealand Cricket commenting on the fact that it's coming out from behind the paywall, right, the service. But the thing is, went there in the first place and did Spark couldn't have anticipated COVID disruptions, but surely they should have anticipated how expensive rights are.
Absolutely. I think the writing was on the wall before COVID, really. They came out of the gate in 2019. Simon Muter, the chief executive at the time, he was really ambitious in his thinking. They did the Rugby World Cup, had a lot of hiccups with that, a lot of disruption to the games, technical problems with the streaming. They managed to then get a few decent rights packages, but realised as some of them quickly came up for renewal just how aggressive Sky was being in this market. And the prospect also of maybe an Amazon or other players coming in to the market as well. So they're looking at what's ahead of them. They're investing heavily in their 5G network. They've built an Internet of Things network, which will run all these sort of fancy devices that connect our cities and homes together. All of that stuff is something they have more control over and also will give them more margin, more value that they can supply to their customers. So they've made a hard call to put all of that hundreds of millions of dollars of investment behind them, cut their losses. I think it's the smart thing to do.
Yeah, so will we have streamed sport from a New Zealand entity again, do you think? Or we're just not big enough to compete? Because I note that offshore, other companies like in the UK are also bailing out, aren't they? Or have bailed out.
Yeah, look, there'll always be the potential for some, upstart to negotiate a deal for New Zealand rights. But in terms of producing sports programming here, going out and shooting live football matches, cricket, rugby, I think Sky is going to own that. TVNZ has a little bit of capacity in that, but they will be constrained in trying to secure the rights, paying the tens of millions of dollars to do that. So I think what will happen is the likes of Vodafone, 2 Degrees and Spark increasingly will be partnering with these so-called over-the-top providers. They'll be going out to the Amazons and other providers to make their packages more attractive, add in a sports streaming subscription along with your broadband and your mobile for $100 a month or whatever. But the days of them actually trying to do it themselves, I think, is over for telcos. The nail in the coffin of that was the rejection of the Vodafone Sky merger a few years ago. The Commerce Commission said no. They've unwound their partnership recently as a result of that. That was just a sign, I think, that the telcos were not able to pursue that business model.
Peter, people seem to be rah-rahing this, right, at the moment. David White, obviously from New Zealand Cricket, there saying he thinks it's a good thing. OK, well, that might be the case until the 2025-26 season. But If your predictions are right and the only player that can afford to snap these up are Sky, the implications are that you'll have to dig deep into your pocket to watch New Zealand cricket.
Sadly, that's it. We don't have so-called anti-siphoning legislation. For instance, in the UK, it's mandatory that FIFA games are screened live on free-to-air TV. We didn't go down that path. And it effectively means unless the legislation changes, Sky has the ability to scoop all of that up. And, when you look at it, Sky 2 years ago was teetering. It was in very poor shape. So it's turned things around a bit, and it's realizing we still have a monopoly on sport. That is what they're rebuilding that whole company around. And now their competition is coming at them from every direction. The Amazons, the Disneys, the HBOs, that is their big threat. So they'll be very, very happy that at least sport is shored up for the time being.
Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That is Peter Griffin, technology commentator there. What do you reckon? So, cricket going to free to air in the meantime. Future, not so certain. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Independent commissioners have gone against popular opinion in Rotorua, allowing 13 motels to continue as emergency housing. More than 860 people will be in motels under contracts with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, but there will be conditions. The majority of almost 4,000 submissions by Rotorua residents opposed the resource consents to continue. Lucy Sear reports.
Rolly Ralston, who's lived for 22 years near Fenton Street, has moved to Papamoa earlier this year after what he describes as ongoing abuse from people who stayed in emergency housing.
Used to be able to walk to the supermarket and the mall and feel quite safe and take my grandchildren with me. Got to the stage that because of abuse I just wouldn't go anywhere unless I was driving.
While the motels will continue, the consent now comes with a list of conditions for site management, noise control and other new rules, such as banning dogs. The ministry has also been asked to form a committee liaison group for engagement with providers and the community. And the independent commissioners have granted 2 years for the resource consent period, rather than the 5 years requested by the ministry. Mr Ralston says he feels the residents' grievances have been ignored.
I think they haven't listened to the people. Once again, they've gone purely what the law says or try to meet a balance of 2 years or 5 years. Whatever it is, it's too long.
Meanwhile, the president of lobby group Restore Rotorua, Trevor Newbrook, says he's disappointed with the approvals, but glad that the consent period has been reduced.
I was a little disappointed that the commissioners granted all 13 consents. I thought that maybe they would have granted 9 or 10, but I'm very pleased with the 2-year time frame for the resource consents. Yeah, much better than 5 years.
And he feels the new council is listening.
We seem to be getting a bit of support from the Rotorua Lakes Council. We've had a change of mayor here and a new council that seem a bit more determined to try and get the emergency housing thing cleaned up.
As part of the conditions, the ministry is required to submit an exit program 6 months before the motel's consents expire, including relocation plans for the residents. Rotorua Mayor Tanya Tapsell welcomes the decision and feels there is an end in sight for eliminating emergency housing in Rotorua.
I was really pleased to learn that it would only be for 2 years, not the 5 years that is requested. Reason being is it sets a target to eliminate the need for emergency housing in Rotorua by the end of 2024.
Ms Tapsell says things are moving in a positive direction, with a reduction of 20 motels used as emergency housing as compared to this time last year.
It is 20 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o Whakaari, we would love your feedback. You may have heard a bit of chatter in the background. Discussion in the studio right now is about finding coins in your Christmas pudding. Evie has raised it as a tradition. We can't work out why it happened, and Clay Wilson reckons he's never heard of it. So if you know anything about it, do text us 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Solve the mystery for us, please. Email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd love to hear from you about anything else you've heard on the program this evening as well. Right now, Evie is standing by with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
A group has ventured onto the Whakaari White Island crater to lay a plaque in memory of the 22 people who lost their lives in the 2019 eruption. Mark Inman, who lost his brother Hayden, says they had permission to visit for the anniversary and had a safety plan in place. He'd been hoping for a permanent memorial. New Zealand's highest court has quashed the prison sentence imposed on a gang member who acted as a drug courier between Auckland and Wellington, partly because of the effect on his 2 young children. Jason Brendan Phillips successfully appealed his 2-year, 11-month term. The Supreme Court has replaced it with a sentence of 1 year and 7 months, but he'll spend no more time in prison due to time served. Aucklanders will have their say on a proposal to sell shares in the city's airport as part of the council's plan to address a $295 million hole in its finances. The council's also suggesting cutting funding for childcare centres and an average rates rise of 4.6%. The Ukrainian government believes Russia is planning a broad new offensive in the new year. Ukraine has significantly improved its air defences but is calling for even more advanced weaponry. And the majority of more than 16,000 official documents about the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 have been released in full for the first time. However, 515 will remain classified. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland on the southwestern motorway, a crash that was blocking the right southbound lane just after Queenstown Road on-ramp has been cleared away, but there still may be residual backup. And earlier today, a crash on State Highway 1 through Karapiro and Cambridge is still causing long delays in both directions. I'll have more news headlines and traffic for you at 5:40.
Kia ora rā, Eho. One of the biggest scandals in cricket history is resurfacing as the Australia and South Africa sides get set for the start of the first test in Brisbane tomorrow. It is their first test encounter since the infamous Sandpapergate saga unfolded in Cape Town more than 4 years ago. So has everyone moved on? I haven't. Anyway, here to tell us is sports reporter Clay Wilson. All right, it was
Us
a big
Kiwis
deal.
Definitely haven't, have we? We won't forget this.
Oh, fascinating, right? And the links you're prepared to go to. So has time healed the wounds between these two teams?
Well, I think we're going to find out. The thing is, you look at how Australians are when they play sport, particularly cricket, very confident, intense, to use a couple of adjectives that spring to mind. The thing is, South Africans play the game in the same way. So when these two teams meet, it's sometimes inevitable that things are going to boil over. You've got two very common types of characteristics coming together.
A-types.
In elite sport, exactly. So you take the history into account and that, and you just feel like something is going to happen. Going back to 2018, of course, that sandpaper incident, infamous sandpaper in the pocket, down the pants, that kind of thing.
Yep.
It led to a ban for that player, Cameron Bancroft, but also Steve Smith, David Warner. Since then, some of the South African players have retired, but there's still 6 Australian players that played in that series playing in this game.
They're going to be checking their pockets before they get onto the...
Well, the cameras are certainly going to be watching, aren't they? Australian batter Usman Khawaja was asked about this week, and he said things like, they've moved on, they're a very different team, they've matured, they've grown up. Things, admittedly, we have heard before. So even if the players on the inside are making all the right noises, there are people on the outside sort of trying to blow oxygen on the embers of this situation, because former captain Michael Clarke, he came out and he's somewhat weirdly encouraged South Africa to sledge David Warner, who was, of course, the sort of kingpin in this whole, was made out to be the kingpin anyway in this whole situation. And then he's also encouraging David Warner to give it back. So he obviously wants to see things kick off. Yeah. And then David Warner's manager in the last week or so coming out and revealing that apparently there was more than 3 Australian players involved in the Sandpapergate back in 2018. So just dredging up that situation again ahead of this series. And that came off the back of David Warner himself. He was trying to get off his lifetime leadership ban that Cricket Australia placed on him for this incident. And then he withdrew it at the last minute, saying Cricket Australia wanted to do it in public and he didn't want to go through it in public and put his family through it. So it's really been all the talk about this and none about the actual cricket on the field. Not hugely surprising. And as I say, just the two teams in general, you add the history in. If something boils over, it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world, I have to say.
Yeah, it's never going to go away. People won't forget that.
No.
It's like the old underarm thing, isn't it? Okay. This next one is a bit of a heartbreaker. Oh, I feel so sorry for these people. Okay, so some older swimmers, they were out to set a pretty impressive record.
Yeah,
Give us the details, Clay.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but I think regardless of how it panned out, it's still clearly an incredible effort to do what they did. So this is 6 swimmers. They had a combined age of 449. So you break that down, the average is 75 years old, these 6 swimmers were. And what they were trying to do was be the oldest relay group to swim across the English Channel. So they set off in the dark in the morning from the English coast, 33 kilometres it is, across to Calais. Choppy conditions, so the seas didn't make it easy for them. 18 hours later, they arrive in Calais. Happy days, they've got the record. But these processes have to be ratified. These records, have to be ratified by an official body. And this is where it gets a bit murky, because apparently there was a changeover between 2 of the swimmers, where the oldest swimmer, an 80-year-old man, he drifted away from the support boat, and he couldn't, somewhat ironically, couldn't hear when they were calling him back for his changeover. He also, had water in his ears and in his goggles.
So did he swim a little bit too far before changing over?
Well, I think everything turned out okay, but what happened is there was a delay in the changeover.
Yeah.
And the group of swimmers say that the rules allow for 5 minutes, and they only took 4 minutes, and so they're fine. But the official body said that it's illegal. So understandably, this group of older swimmers are not that happy. Some of the group have described it as nitpicking and pedantic, and calling the officials devoid of common sense. So they're feeling pretty harsh about it, and reportedly considering legal action over it. So
wow.
Yeah. So it's really going to be interesting to see how this pans out. Like I say, an amazing effort, and seems like a bit of a cruel technicality to deny them of it based on a little changeover incident, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, thanks for that, Clay. That is sports reporter Clay Wilson there. To be honest, 'tis the season for indulgence, or for some of us, maybe overindulgence, eating your body weight in delicious, tasty treats, just one more chocolate, a tiny sliver of pav. But whether you favour a good old-fashioned barbie, hangi or ham with all the trimmings, odds on your Christmas feast is likely to cost you more this year, with inflation running as hot as a roast on a sweaty summer's day. While Infometrics principal economist Brad Olsen has been crunching some of the numbers for us and joins us now. Hi, Brad. I'm very excited about this topic.
Good
close
evening.
to my heart, feasting. First of all, give us a bit of a taster on what you put on your menu for this imaginary dinner that we're looking at the cost for. Kind of what do you reckon makes up the components of a Christmas feast?
Yep, so what I've put together is you've got to have some snacks to start with. So, some olives, camembert, a few crackers. Then you've got 2 options for dinner. Either you do sort of the traditional roast option, so you might have some ham, a bit of lamb, some pork as well, potatoes, kumara, pumpkin, bit of gravy, some beans on the side. Or we can go down the barbecue option, a bit of steak, sausages, lamb chops. We can have a potato salad. And a bit of lettuce salad as well. And then we get to, of course, the most important bit, dessert. Pavlova, of course, a bit of ice cream. And then I had to outsource some of this afternoon's analysis to my grandmother to try and figure out the cost of a figgy pudding. That's currently what's on the menu. No drinks included, it's a fairly basic menu, if you will. But I think, to be fair, the cost of just that is staggering enough.
Okay. Before we move on, Brad, what's Grandma's name, please?
Christine.
Christine. Okay, so Christine was the one who gave you the tips on the figgy pudding, so a shout out to Christine. All right, and in your mind, were you calculating feeding how many people with this dinner, roundabout, or...?
So this is calculated for sort of a 10-person dinner. I've broken it down sort of per person, but the easiest way I think to think about it is if you're trying to feed a group of 10 that have come over. So, maybe your core family and a few hangers-on.
Okay. Always few hangers-on at Christmas. And your general observations are what when you calculated the costs of this feast?
Geez, things are expensive. Probably the most shocking part was actually, of all of the single items I looked at, potatoes were the killer. Potato prices up 71% in 2022 compared to, say, 2019. So you're paying a fair bit more. You used to be able to get a kg of potatoes for about $1.80 or so. It's now $3.07. So you've seen the costs go up. Importantly, though, as much as I really enjoy having a barbecue on Christmas Day, out of my 2 options of that or a more traditional meal, the barbecue is far, far more expensive. Your steak and chops and similar, definitely not the most cost-effective option.
Okay, can you give us an idea of what your per head or your dinner costs were with the either or?
If we go with the more traditional option, for that 10-person group, you're looking at $251.74. That's 14% more expensive than the same meal back in 2019. 37% more than back in, say, 2006. If you go for the barbecue option, you're talking $330 or so, up 17% from 2019. And look, even something like the humble potato salad, up 20% over the last few years, now costing you nearly $20 to make. And my grandmother's favourite figgy pudding now costing just over $10 to create.
Okay, so the figgy pudding, just over $10 to create. I'm wondering, am I going away with a full tummy here, Brad, or have you been modest with your proportions? Because people will want to know how much you're feeding everybody. How'd you work that out?
We've debated this at length. I've talked to some of the lovely Checkpoint team. I've checked in with my grandmother as well when she's preparing Christmas dinner. I think we've got a fairly reasonable amount of food. In a sense, I didn't want to sort of give us, half a kg of steak each. That's a little bit overindulgent, but I think there's probably not a huge amount of leftovers either in a sense. So maybe a little bit moderate in a sense. But look, let's be real: $330, $251 for the other option. That's a great whack of money, and that's again with not much on the trimming side, no drinks at all included, and probably not a lot of leftovers. That's an expensive Christmas.
Yeah, it is. Pav, how did the Pav? How did that look?
PAV came out, if you were to build it today, and I've looked at these in quite a lot of detail. If you were to build the PAV today, it'd cost you $12.35 to make it. That's about 4% more than back in 2019. But, and there's an important caveat here, strawberry costs have actually come down quite a bit now that we're into that better summer season. So if you exclude the strawberries, you're looking at a 19% increase in the cost of PAV. The major there is the cost of eggs. You're spending 35% more on the same eggs as a few years back. So the PAV is still an incredibly important option for Christmas, but it is becoming more and more costly.
Yeah, and it doesn't fill your belly up, Brad. It's kind of, it's light and fluffy and yum, but you still need to have a slice of figgy pudding after the fact. Now, before you go, you talked about building the PAV, Brad, so I need to know, can you actually cook?
Not very well. Put it this way: there's a reason that I do economics, and when I get home for the summer, I will be told in no uncertain terms that I am not to step foot in the kitchen, lest something burn or something go wrong. I'll provide moral support from afar.
And economic support. We really appreciate you crunching those numbers for us. That is Brad Olsen from Infometrics. He's the principal economist there. Now, we were discussing, before talking to Brad, this thing about coins in your Christmas pudding or your Christmas cake. Evie brought it up. Clay thought she was telling porkies. Well, lots of you have got in touch. One person says, we always had threepences. I don't think Evie's that old. We had threepences in the Christmas pud. No idea why, they say. And apparently, another person's got in touch and said, coin was for good luck for the next year. My English grandmother did it. And someone else agrees that it was supposed to bring you good luck. Dates back to the 1300s, reckons Chris. And it was an English tradition, but apparently when the new money changed, they stopped doing it because it was a bit yucky and toxic. And they say it used to be, in the olden days, a silver coin, like an actual silver coin, so it was considered to be safe.
We had 5-cent pieces.
Yeah, well, okay, you went with the cheap version then.
Excuse him, what? My auntie was doing her best.
And Miss Leo says, Clouty Dumpling has coins wrapped in wax paper in the dumpling for family to find in their piece of cake. This is an old Scottish tradition. So there you go. We've solved that mystery. Take that, Clay Wilson. It is 25 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoe e nai ko Nona Peltier, who joins us in the studio to talk business. Ever found a coin in your Christmas pud, Nona?
No.
Not something.
No, not ever. But, I have to say, I was just listening to Brad there. He got promoted recently. He's the chief executive now.
Not until next year. Oh. So he's been appointed to the job, but he takes it over next year, as I understand it. But
wow.
Yeah, so there you go.
Okay,
Still available to do Christmas costings for us at the moment. Okay, so let's talk about more costs associated with the massive fire at the International Convention Centre. This is the Sky Casino. What's the latest info?
Yeah, so I guess late October we talked about Sky City losing that concession deal they had for their parking space. That was going to cost them, or was going to basically lose them, $220 million. So now Fletcher Building says it's going to cost them another $150 million to get the thing done. It's fallen behind schedule. The insurance payout that they received doesn't cover all of the costs that have taken its toll, not just because of COVID, but labor market shortages and so on. So instead of the building was originally going to open in 2019. That was the last open date before the fire. In the end, we ended up now we're looking for 2025 as an opening. So those costs do add up, because not only, of course, is the delay in opening, but the delay in bookings and all of that goes with it.
It's not making you money, it's just costing you money.
It's just costing you money, and it's been going on for a very long time.
Okay, let's talk manufacturing activity. Is contracting at a faster rate. What's the reason?
Well, it's the new orders that have dragged it down. So we talked about this, so new orders is what drives manufacturing. You get an order, you manufacture more. But new orders have been contracting now for 3 months in a row. And the last number was 41.8. Anything above 50 indicates expansion. So 41.8 compared with 44.4 the month before. Those numbers show us that there's quite a deep contraction there, and that's been going on for 3 months in a row. And the senior economist at the Bank of New Zealand, Craig Ebert, says it doesn't get much worse than that when it comes to new orders. That's bad. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the retailers and whoever the on-sellers of these manufactured goods are not ordering more. So
handbrake's going on.
That's
okay,
it.
Nona, tell us what the markets had to offer today.
Okay, so the top 50 index, it ended up nearly 2 points. Now that's pretty good, because Fletcher was dropped 2.6%. That's a big company in the index. So we went up just towards the end of the day. We bumped up to end up in the black, 2 points, 11,604. When that really compares with Asia, which is looking really sad on it after the U.S. Federal Reserve, talked about hiking interest rates even harder than they were. The New Zealand dollar, as a result of that, of course, it dropped a bit, but just a little bit, 63.6 U.S. cents, and it touched stronger against the Australian at 94.7 and 52.1 British pence.
People will be watching them with an eagle eye, Nona, as they prepare for the holiday season and potentially travel. So thank you for that. Nona Peltier there with Business News. It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaara, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. What's on your Christmas menu? Have you done sort of costings? Have you worked out what it would be? We had Brad Olsen on there before. He reckons about $330 for a barbecue for 10 people. He says your belly will be quite full, but you won't be stuffed, and there will be no leftovers. Expensive. It's up about 17% from 2019 on his figures. $251 for a traditional meal with ham and the trimmings, up 14% since 2019 on his calculations. So what have you got on the menu, and have you squirreled away some money or, little bits and pieces through the year for this? 2101 on text, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And have you ever had a coin in your Christmas pudding? It is time for the headlines now. Ko Evi Anō tēnei.
The Council of Trade Unions says Aotearoa doesn't have the skills and expertise needed for its bursting pipeline of infrastructure projects. A report from the Infrastructure Commission, Te Waihanga, shows complex projects, including motorways, road tunnels and underground rail, are more expensive in New Zealand than elsewhere. The Council says that's partly because the country has to rely on expensive overseas contractors. Meanwhile, Seek New Zealand's November report shows a record number of jobs advertised between January and May, and applications increasing for the 9th month in a row. The hospitality and tourism sector is the top driver of job growth, while ads mentioning work from home options have ballooned by more than 12 times pre-pandemic levels. In Malaysia, a landslide has killed at least 9 people as they slept at a campsite. Search teams are scouring thick mud and downed trees for about 24 people still missing. A group has ventured onto the Whakaari White Island crater to lay a plaque in memory of the 22 people who lost their lives in the 2019 eruption. Mark Inman, who lost his brother Hayden, says they had permission to visit for the anniversary and had a safety plan in place. And the majority of more than 16,000 official documents about the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 has been released in full for the first time. However, 515 documents will remain classified. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, a crash this morning on State Highway 1 through Karapiru and Cambridge has been causing long delays this afternoon in both directions for travellers in the Waikato. There hasn't been an update in the last wee while, but you can let us know on 2101 if you're stuck in that traffic or if it's now free-flowing once your vehicle is stationary, that is. In the South Island in Te Madu, a crash is blocking the northbound lane between Scarborough Road and Beaconsfield Road on State Highway 1, so there's some traffic management in place there. I'll have a full bulletin for you at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. And speaking of traffic management, as many Kiwis prepare to hit the road for summer, the Transport Agency is getting ready for its regular holiday schedule of road resurfacing. Work will be carried out on about 10% of the country's state highways this summer. But what happens to the old road seal when new asphalt is laid on? Well, Fulton Hogan has a new machine to deal with the leftovers in a more environmentally friendly way. Our reporter Tom Taylor and camera operator Nick Monroe have the story.
As Fulton Hogan concludes its clean-up of a road sealing disaster in Dome Valley that saw chip seal coating weekend travellers' tyres, the company's adding a new machine to its arsenal which reuses the old asphalt from roads like this in need of repair. Their Belgian-designed mobile asphalt crusher is the first fully electric model in Australasia. And it's what Transport Minister Michael Wood describes as a win-win-win, creating less waste, recycling materials and saving money in the process.
We know that we've got a big challenge in our system to decarbonise transport. Some of that's about what we build, but it's also about how we build it.
High traffic roads like state highways need resealing about every 7 years. That's a lot of asphalt and potentially a lot going to waste every time the maintenance roster rolls around.
This enables us to have approximately 30% recycled product in some of the roads that we're laying down around the country. So that's a huge step up in terms of our ability to take something that otherwise might have been a waste product and use the value of it to build and maintain our roads.
Waka Kotahi was critical of Fulton Hogan's State Highway 1 resealing work in Dome Valley, but Mr Wood says there are lessons to be learned from the failure. He says the roading network's coming under increasing pressure from climate change, with regions like Northland, Nelson Marlborough and the East Cape already dealing with the repercussions.
From government and Waka Kotahi, we're doing a lot of work on how we make sure that we build a more resilient network, but we're going to have to do a lot of work to make sure we keep on top of that. It is going to require more investment in the future, but it's also a good reason to be making sure that we do what we can to reduce our emissions and prevent climate change from becoming even worse.
Fulton Hogan's new machine ticks some of these boxes, saving an estimated 80 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions each year. It's also a money saver to the tune of $55,000 a year. Savings which will be passed on, Auckland Regional Manager James Weller says.
The savings that we're going to be making going forward is around the amount of diesel that we were burning previously when we were crushing asphalt. It's a lot cheaper to run, and that flows through our whole process to the end product and to our customers.
Mr Weller says it's the kind of capital investment that's needed to reach the company's carbon reduction targets. Fulton Hogan aims to have a 30% emission reduction on its 2021 baseline by 2030 and become net carbon zero by 2050.
We're here at Fulton Hogan's Mount Wellington plant, where roads come to die, or rather, be reborn. I'm holding onto a slab of someone's driveway which has come into the plant, and it's about to go through Fulton Hogan's first ever electric mobile asphalt crusher. Now, this crusher is currently operating at about 40%, but it's still processing 130 tonnes of asphalt per hour. So this little slab of driveway could soon be redeployed on a road near you.
Bert Hart is the general manager of Equip 2, which supplied Fulton Hogan with the machine. He says the electric crushers produce about 60,000 tonnes of recycled asphalt a year, creating what he calls a circular economy. But with just 30% recycled material currently going into the mix, Mr Hart says there's work to be done to get it up to 100%.
With New Zealand, I think we use about 9 to 10 tonnes of aggregate per person per year. It's a lot. It's something we don't actually think about, but it's going into our houses, industries, roading, infrastructure, technology, even healthcare. So it's awesome to know that it's getting reused again, and it's also de-risking and lowering the emissions.
Mr. Hart says New Zealand companies can look to their European counterparts as world leaders in recycling roads and continue driving towards their target of giving all materials a second life.
Budget blowouts and lengthy delays have become part and parcel of just about any big project in New Zealand. A new Infrastructure Commission report shows the country's approach to big builds is inefficient and expensive. And it says there's no way infrastructure woes can be fixed unless there's a way to cut costs without compromising on quality. Lauren Crimp has the story.
Transmission Gully, a $400 million budget blowout and 2 years overdue. Christchurch's Te Kaha Stadium, $150 million over before a shovel hit the ground. The Infrastructure Commission has assessed the lay of the land, comparing how our infrastructure costs stack up against other high-income countries. It's not all bad news. The report shows the cost to build railway stations, power lines, wind farms and hospitals is on par. But big-ticket items like motorways, tunnels and underground rail have eye-watering price tags. The report says that's partly because equipment, land and construction materials are pricier here. But the Commission's Director of Economics, Peter Nuns, says it's not helped by poor planning.
We might want to do the work to figure out all the fixes that we needed across the network, and then sequence them out over a multi-decade period so that we could just do them in a predictable, stable way, set up a bit of a machine to keep turning them over and learning from those projects and getting better at them.
Transporting New Zealand Chief Executive Nick Leggett agrees. He says the government needs to ditch its tendency towards patch-up jobs.
New Zealand, I think, under-specs its infrastructure. It tends to react and build rather than planning for that 50 to 100-year horizon.
He says that's led to crumbling roads many motorists will be all too familiar with, and Waka Kotahi embarking on its biggest road repair season yet.
Our roads are openly telling us that the construction and the methods of construction and design are not up to the standard that New Zealanders would expect.
The report also says the government must get better at procurement. New Zealand Council of Trade Unions economist Craig Rennie says Aotearoa simply doesn't have the skills and expertise needed for the bursting pipeline of complex, large-scale projects.
We don't have a lot of companies, if any, who can actually undertake that work. We tend to import those companies as and when we need them. That's how we end up with overseas contractors building Transmission Gully, for example, or Italian contractors who are building the Central Interceptor in Auckland.
That makes things all the more expensive. But Craig Rennie says it doesn't have to be that way.
This is one of the reasons why we've been campaigning for the return of a Ministry of Green Works, so we can actually become a much more sophisticated procurer and deliverer of these projects. So we've got that capacity in hand in New Zealand, and we can deliver the kinds of complex, difficult projects that we know we're going to need in the future in New Zealand.
There are some things we just can't get around. Our land's susceptibility to shaking and erupting create complexities sending costs further north. But otherwise, the consensus is Aotearoa needs a decades long-term plan protected from chopping and changing with the government of the day.
It is almost 10 minutes to 6. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch on free-to-air cricket. Media companies must not forget TV3's owners have deep pockets and will give providers such as Sky and Spark. I think they mean run for their money and will make it harder, says Gary. Someone else says, legislator, kids can't be it if they can't see it. And Don says, here's my line. If public funding goes into a sport, it should be free to air. Fair is fair, says Don. Another, these types of events might end up on the new free-to-air entity once the merger is completed. These are the sort of public interest broadcasts the new entity will no doubt be chasing on behalf of the ordinary New Zealanders. Public funding spent well, says There's that, listener. And a number of you getting in touch about the coins in the Christmas pudding and other traditions. I particularly like this one. They say our Christmas pudding tradition is to have chopped almonds in it, and only one whole almond, Evie. Only one whole almond. And the person who gets the whole almond gets a gift. Fun, they say, and it slows down the eating a bit. That is a good point.
Wait till you bite into metal. That also slows down the eating.
Yeah, but that's an interesting tradition. You may actually eat the almond that gives you the gift or the prize without knowing it. Kia amo tonu mai, stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. For many people, this time of the year is a season of giving. But an 81-year-old man in the UK has just received a particularly special present from the jolly fellow in red. The ABC's Barney Porter explains.
Jingle bells, jingle all the way. 'Twas the week before Christmas, and a miracle took place at a seasonal community lunch in Hyde in Greater Manchester, where Santa was the top billing. One of the young lads waiting for the arrival of the sleigh was 81-year-old Tom Webster, who, perhaps overcome with the excitement of the moment, collapsed and stopped breathing.
I was slumped in the chair with my head down the side there.
It looked, well, grim. But unbeknownst to Mr. Webster, already waiting backstage was Father Christmas himself, or at least one of his helpers, who was giving St. Nick a bit more gift-wrapping time back at the North Pole. And fortuitously for Mr. Webster, this particular part-time Santa was a former accident and emergency nurse who now runs his own community ambulance service. He's also known as John Paul Gilmore.
He had no colour whatsoever in his face. He wasn't responding at all, and there was no breathing.
Mr. Gilmore sprang into action, throwing aside his sack of goodies to administer cardiac massage. 4 chest compressions later, Mr. Webster was breathing again.
Remarkably, Tom's first response was, ouch. And the second response was, which I've never heard before, where's my present?
Concerned media assembled at Santa's presser immediately asked the vital follow-up question, did he indeed get a present?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Well, the gift of life does come to mind. But anyway, it seems Mr. Webster had forgiven the apparent oversight at their subsequent reunion, with no indication of any disappointment.
Merry Christmas, Tom. Good to see you again.
Come in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let's go.
And hopefully the real Santa will make amends when he does his rounds in 9 sleeps' time. Merry Christmas. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey!
A major announcement teased by Donald Trump has turned out to be digital trading cards in his likeness. The very creative NFT cards feature a slim, shredded Trump in a tux, dressed as Superman, as an astronaut, a cowboy, and wearing a so-called true champion belt. Stop it, Evie. The cringe reveal has brought mockery from Liberals and Conservatives alike.
These cards feature some of the really incredible artwork pertaining to my life and my career. It's been very exciting. You can collect your Trump digital cards just like a baseball card or other collectibles.
Each card costs a mere 155 New Zealand dollars and is being promoted via Trump's Truth social media platform. The 76-year-old has taken a battering in the polls lately. Amid rumours, the Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis, is the likely Republican candidate in the next presidential election. CNN's Maggie Haberman has more.
Donald Trump's calling card is strength and being seen as strong within his party. And when that starts to erode, it's very hard for him to keep other people at bay. Now, he's the only person who's running right now. You wouldn't know that because he's done no events. I can't really remember the last time I saw somebody announce for president and do literally nothing. I'm told it's going to change next month, but we'll see what happens. But this is obviously not where Trump wanted to be.
State-of-the-art bells and whistles facilities are being set up for high-performance athlete accommodation in Upper Hutt. A sink to scrub your footy boots, a video performance analysis station and huge showers are among the mod cons, which will be used by the Sweden team visiting for the FIFA Women's World Cup next year. The New Zealand campus of innovation and sport facilities have been designed with everything athletes need on and off the field. Our reporter Lauren Crimp and cameraman Angus Drever took a tour.
Oh my god. What do you reckon? I love it. It's so nice. Wow. So cool.
3 Wellington Phoenix players checking out the brand spanking new digs for the first time. Millie Clegg, Claudia Chico and Finn Sermon say it's streets ahead of anything they've seen before, and for good reason. Campus director Jamie Tout says these apartments have been designed by athletes for athletes, with Sarah Hedeny, Kendra Coxedge, Les Elder, Tamati Ellison and Grant Elliott among those who pitched in with ideas.
They all talked about what the important things were. So it seems like we're putting blackout curtains on the windows, so when you rock up after having jet lag and you want to get a good night's sleep, you can black out completely. The bag shelves, the height of the ceiling was important. The connection to the outdoors. So every apartment has an outdoor balcony, at least one, and the southern facing ones have a couple. And then downstairs they all have courtyards. So this is a cool room because you look straight out into the pitch.
Oh my god, wow.
Which is quite cool.
There are 50 apartments and half are wheelchair accessible. The Chiefs Manawa will be the first team to sleep, eat and train here in February ahead of the Super Rugby Opaki season opener, before the Swedish women's football team arrive for their World Cup campaign. The athletes, whose lives are largely spent on the road, are impressed.
I think when you're away from home, it's important to feel comfortable where you are, and when you've got somewhere like this, it's so nice, easy to get into the shower, awesome bed, amazing chairs, all that sort of stuff, easy to cook up whatever you want to do. It's perfect. It helps the transition from being away from home, and that'll probably help you perform better.
The rooms are part of an 18-hectare complex funded by developers Malcolm Gillies and Kevin Melville, who have so far coughed up more than $100 million. It's kitted out with a state-of-the-art gym, cycle training rooms, plunge pools, team rooms, and indoor and outdoor fields with 360-degree cameras for training analysis. But for players, it's the little things, like fitting in the shower.
Well, for tall athletes like yourself, mate, we've used the Brodie Whakaari Kite stick a lot. Oh, yeah. So if you have a look in the showers over there, you'll see that they're really massive showers, nice big rainfall sort of fittings as well.
Yeah, perfectly.
So what do you, mate, 6'3"?
Yeah, 6'3". I say so. What shoes on?
Jamie Tout says the standard is among the best in the world.
Talking with people from New York Giants, talking to people from West Coast Eagles, what do they expect when they go to hotels? Because that's what we really expect in the long term. These won't just be used by local athletes and potentially business conferences, but also touring teams. So next year, we're really excited that the Swedish women's team will be here. We'll be their hosts for the entire tournament. And we know when they visited, they walked in here and went, wow, we could see ourselves being here.
Much of the complex is a construction site with building and landscaping still underway. In future, it'll be home to Black Ferns and All Blacks training camps, attract clubs of all sports from the US and Japan, and be developed for indoor sports like basketball and netball. Jamie Tout says the finishing touches will be done well before the FIFA Women's World Cup kicks off in July.
And if you are listening to that on radio, do check out the video online. The place looks absolutely incredible. A lot of feedback on your Christmas traditions, whether it's coins in your pudding or other things. Pete from Wellington's got in touch to say, my Irish grandmother put a sixpence in the Christmas pudding because in her childhood, one lucky person would get it and keep it. Sadly, we always had to give it back, says Pete, but it wasn't legal by then anyway. I think it means legal tender. In my partner's Danish tradition, whoever gets the coin can eat a marzipan pig that sits on top of the cake. Disgusting, says Peter. People have very strong feelings about marzipan. What about you, Evie? Love it or hate it?
I'm not a marzipan fan.
Yeah, well, people do. It's a polarising thing. And this one in says, many coins over the years, particularly from my Scottish nana, and accordingly, a very lucky life. Good on you. We're all sharing the food costs, this person says, across 3 families. It'll be yummy and we'll be together.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. 3 years after the Whakaari White Island eruption, a group of people have ventured onto the crater to lay a plaque in memory of the 22 people who lost their lives. They include eruption victims' family, at least one survivor, and a helicopter operator who rescued people on the day. Photos show a group surrounding the plaque didn't wear hard hats or gas masks. Mark Inman, who lost his brother Hayden on the island, says they had permission to visit for the anniversary and had a safety plan in place. He had been hoping for a permanent memorial. Whakaari is at volcanic alert level 2. This is the same level as December the 19th, 2019, the day of the explosion. 13 motels in Rotorua have been allowed to continue to operate as emergency housing, despite the majority of nearly 4,000 submissions opposing the consents. The decision by independent commissioners was released yesterday. Some Rotorua residents are unhappy with the outcome. Lucy Sia reports.
Rolly Ralston, who lived for 22 years in Rotorua before moving away due to safety concerns, says residents' concerns are being ignored. The president of lobby group Restore Rotorua, Trevor Newbrook, also says he's disappointed with the approvals, but glad that the consent period has been reduced to 2 years. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development originally asked for a consent period of 5 years. The consent now comes with a list of conditions for site management, noise control and other new rules such as the banning of dogs.
The company whose contractors were working on Christchurch's wastewater treatment plant when a fire broke out says it doesn't believe they're responsible for the blaze. A fire and emergency investigation has found last year's fire most likely started when the workers accidentally ignited either maintenance tape or the roof of one of the trickling tanks with an open flame heating tool. The report noted investigators haven't been able to determine exactly how the fire started because the Goldman Group staff have declined to be interviewed. The company's chief executive, Joel Matsis, says 2 employees suffered minor burns trying to extinguish the flames. He says Goldman backs their view that they didn't cause the fire. Mr. Matsis says the staff members were offered independent legal advice and subsequently decided not to speak to the fire investigators. A landslide has killed at least 9 people as they slept at a campsite in Malaysia. Search teams are scouring thick mud and downed trees for about 24 people still missing. Our correspondent Richard Kimber reports.
The landslide took place in the early hours of Friday morning near the popular Genting Highlands region, around 50 kilometres north of Malaysia's capital, Kuala Lumpur. Around 80 people are thought to have been camping at a local farm when a landslide began on a slope above the campsite. Fire crews arrived before dawn to begin a rescue operation. 60 people have been rescued, but searches are continuing for more survivors. It's unclear what triggered the landslide. The region is in the midst of its rainy season, but no heavy rain or earthquakes were recorded overnight.
It appears Destiny Church leader Brian Tamaki has been approached by police for naming the baby at the centre of a court case over a blood transfusion. A video posted to Mr Tamaki's Facebook page shows 2 police officers outside his house asking to talk to him about a recent post on Facebook. The video post claims the officers wanted to talk to Mr Tamaki, who was not home, about using the baby's name when suppression orders prevented him being identified. Police say they can't comment on the situation for privacy reasons, but say they will follow up suppression breaches reported to them or referred to police by the court. The baby has automatic name suppression. A technology commentator says Spark is just one of many telecommunications companies worldwide to throw in the towel when it comes to streaming sport. TVNZ is expected to take over most of Spark's broadcasting rights when Spark Sport stops streaming at the end of June. Peter Griffin says it's not surprising.
We've seen a lot of telecoms operators around the world try and get into the content game and realise very quickly just how expensive it is, particularly those sports auctions, to get the crucial rights to screen some of these games.
However, Peter Griffin questions whether TVNZ will have the inclination or money to chase sports rights if it's merged with RNZ. And a brand of spinach products has been recalled. Food Standards says Riviera Farms baby spinach has potentially been contaminated with unsafe plant material, which could cause illness. Consumers are being advised to dispose of it immediately and, if they've eaten it, seek medical advice. Food Standards says initial symptoms could include delirium or confusion, hallucinations, rapid heartbeat and blurred vision. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, 'twas the week before Christmas, but Country Life still has its gumboots on. That's at 7. Beck Runga is our Friday Night Live artist. Dan Slevin with our weekend watching picks. And Finn Johansson brings us some new music from around the snow globe. Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland and Auckland, fine spells and isolated showers today. Cloudy tomorrow with rain at times. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, cloudy with periods of rain or drizzle. Waikato to Manawatu, including the Central High Country. Also from Gisborne to Wairarapa. Scattered showers and possible thunderstorms becoming isolated this evening. Widespread rain developing tomorrow with heavy falls. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also Marlborough and Nelson, cloudy periods and a few showers turning to rain tomorrow. Bulla, occasional rain today, a few showers developing late tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland, rain at times, possibly heavy. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain or showers, clearing for a time tonight and tomorrow morning. Thunderstorms and hail possible in the afternoons and evenings south of Ashburton, low cloud or fog at times along the coast. And Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, low cloud and drizzle. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai, hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Don't expect to skip off overseas on a last-minute getaway. International flights are close to packed, with some fares up to double the normal rates, according to one leading travel agency. This is the first summer of fully open borders since COVID hit. Air New Zealand's expecting its busiest day to be December 23rd, with 55,000 passengers heading away. But Flight Centre's Victoria Courtney says there's been itchy feet across the board.
Been huge pent-up demand for Kiwis wanting to get overseas, and certainly this time of year is no exception, and we've got huge demand with Kiwis. All the flights are full going out of New Zealand, so definitely lots of us travelling this summer.
And compared to pre-COVID numbers, can you give us a comparison?
Well, our capacity internationally is still only about 70% of what it was pre-COVID, although despite that, every single flight that's leaving at the moment is full, and so we're definitely seeing those numbers really, really high out of New Zealand. So not an exact number, but we're definitely selling almost as much travel as we were pre-COVID.
So, Victoria, every plane departing is packed.
Absolutely. We're really struggling to get anyone who is looking for last minute. It's really difficult to find seats. So, yeah, those planes are very full, so don't expect to get spare seats when you are travelling overseas.
Because the thing is, let's say if, you were in the privileged situation of waking up one sunny morning and just thinking, right, I'd like to get on a plane today. What's your chances?
It's a really low chance. You might be able to find some availability on some days out to some of the Pacific Islands, but Australia is absolutely chockers, and then heading over to Europe as well, we're seeing really high demand. The US has maybe got a little bit more space, but absolutely all of those other destinations are pretty tightly packed with passengers at this stage.
Okay, so what's the list of top destinations then, Victoria?
Over this summer holidays, probably our biggest destination is no surprise to us being Australia, which is always a hot favourite for Kiwis at Christmas time. But we are still seeing large numbers of passengers going over to the US, and then Fiji and Samoa and Rotorua as well, so those Pacific Island destinations. And then we've started to see Asia returning as well with the likes of Singapore.
People are talking about the prices of a plane fare. So what can you tell us about the most significant price hikes? What are they and where are you seeing them?
we are seeing large price increases across all destinations, and that's in line with exceptionally high demand and also lower capacity than we had pre-COVID. At this time of year, even before COVID, it was typical for us to see sometimes prices as much as double outside of, in quieter time. And that's probably consistent with what we're seeing at the moment. Those prices for Christmas travel are probably double what they would be outside of that Christmas peak. But we are seeing prices up across all destinations. But that, as I said, is really in line with really high demand and just not enough capacity in the New Zealand market at this stage to service all of those Kiwis wanting to go overseas.
Are more people booking through agents now?
We certainly are seeing a lot of new customers booking with us. And we think that obviously there are some additional complexities and additional things that customers need to be aware of and certainly want to check with us before travelling. And so, we are seeing definitely some changes in our customer base, and it would appear more people are booking with an agent.
And what are you telling people about navigating the airport at this time of year? Because we're told, there's staff shortages there like everywhere. So sounds the warning bell. What are you telling them?
We're definitely telling passengers, give yourself lots of time. Like I said, those flights are full. There's lots of people. And like everywhere at the moment, and the airport is struggling with staffing levels. So lots of time. Make sure you give yourself lots of time on those connections as well. So don't leave yourself too tight when you're transiting through the US or anywhere else. Make sure you've got plenty of time. And whatever you do, just try and stay calm. I think travel hasn't quite got back to normal. There are still some niggly pain points. I think people just need to be prepared for that and roll with it when they can so that they get to their destination as relaxed as possible.
In our imaginary Christmas world, Victoria, if you could get on a plane and go anywhere, what is your number one top recommendation for a destination at this time of the year?
Well, I'm from England. I love a Northern Hemisphere Christmas because I love the cold and, the Christmas lights and all of that. So I would probably be heading over to somewhere maybe like Germany and doing the Christmas markets, which would be ideal. Or my other destination would probably be to go to Tahiti and enjoy some amazing tropical sunshine.
And that was Flight Centre's Victoria Courtney. It is almost 13 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. More than 13,000 official documents about the assassination of John F. Kennedy have been released for the first time. The White House says it hopes to provide the American public with a greater understanding of a tragic moment in the country's history. The BBC's Nomia Iqbal is following the story and says there appears to be a lack of bombshells.
Anything about a grassy knoll and mysterious people on that, or a babushka, or a man holding an umbrella, or any of the other wild conspiracy theories that have emerged over nearly half a century since John F. Kennedy was assassinated, none of that is in those documents, and I don't think anyone expected them to be honest. What historians certainly have been looking for is more information about the assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. He was a former Marine vet who defected to the Soviet Union, or tried to defect to the Soviet Union before the assassination of JFK. And historians think that the CIA know way more about him than they admitted. So at the time, the Warren Commission, which was established to investigate JFK's death, the CIA said they didn't know anything much about Oswald. Historians contest that, so that's what they're looking for. There are so many documents, obviously, to go through, and so they're still going through it and trying to look and find exactly what they're looking for. But I think the fact that only 70% have been released will be disappointing to many of them.
Nomia Iqbal reports that the very slow release of documents over the past few decades has only heightened suspicion.
We've still got, so many more to go yet, and President Biden has said that the remainder will be released eventually. But historians do say, look, just release the lot of them, and it does fuel the conspiracy theories. But what they want to do is understand exactly what happened in what was such a, turning point in American history.
Nomia Iqbal reporting there. It's a winter of discontent in the UK as workers go on strike in multiple industries in the run-up to the holiday season. Rail, airport and postal staff have all walked off the job in recent weeks, angry about pay and conditions. It's meant fewer trains, long waits at airports and the slow delivery of Christmas presents. And just today, tens of thousands of nurses have taken part in the biggest strike in the history of the UK's public health service. The BBC's Ed Thomas has been speaking to some of those who've walked off the job.
What do we want? What do we want it now?
These are the lives behind the picket lines.
It's time that nurses say that enough is enough. It's not getting any better, it's only getting worse.
Like Danielle, a nurse in Liverpool.
There are people in the nursing profession that cannot stay in nursing because they're not getting the pay they need to be able to live. They're not being able to care for patients the way they want to because there isn't enough staff. And then they're going home and they're stressed because they can't pay their bills and they can't look after their own families. So yes, it feels wrong, but it's really important that it happens because that's the only way we get listened to.
Does it feel wrong to you to walk out?
You do worry, how's it going to affect patient care? But we've been assured that patients are being cared for.
The government says the Royal College of Nursing's 19% pay demand is unaffordable. And it has met independent recommendations on pay.
We're in a crisis, but we're caring people. We get people where they need to go every day. We have to take the hope forward.
In Leeds, we met Katie.
We've got to all squeeze in together because we've got kittens on the loose.
Wow.
And my mummy feeling a bit sorry for herself. She'd just been done.
Once a carer, now a train attendant.
I love my job, and you know what? I just want to be loved back.
Like many families with children, right now, money is tight.
Really help. We've got a scheme in Leeds called Surplus to Purpose, where you can get a really big box of food which would otherwise go to waste, £12.
When all the bills are paid, what have you got left?
There is minus left at the end of the month.
Casey fears her role as a train attendant is under threat.
What has brought you out to the picket line? Why are you doing this?
It feels like a fight for a railway service to be proud of. It's about people feeling safe.
Rail industry bosses say changes need to be agreed to afford pay increases and modernise the railway.
Probably the worst time I've ever known it in the last 20 years of working here. What's the future going to be for Royal Mail?
So how long have you been a postie for?
24 years.
Was it your first job?
My first ever job, yeah.
The postal worker in Bolton, the only job Craig has known.
Well, when I first joined, my dad said it's a job for life. I don't think you can say that now to anyone who joins now.
And what are your fears then for the future?
What worries me most are the members of my union losing their jobs. It's going to be owner drivers, it's going to be agency workers, it's going to be casual staff.
Do you think people in the rest of the country understand your concerns?
I think the working class people should understand. All the costs are going up, and the wages are not moving.
It's disrupting people's lives, isn't it?
It's disrupting people's lives, it's disrupting our lives as such. What can we do? What can we do? We have to stand together.
Royal Mail has offered a pay deal it says is worth up to 9% over 18 months.
What do you want? What do you want it now?
For some, this is just the start. More walkouts and more disruption will come.
And that was the BBC's Ed Thomas. Spoiler alert, the latest episodes of the Tell All docu-series about Prince Harry and Meghan have been released with insights into why they left the UK. There are allegations of jealousy, suspicion and a shouting match between the two princes. The Duke of Sussex also blames the constant media intrusion as a critical reason for his wife's miscarriage in 2020. CNN's Max Foster has more.
The palace may have been spared in the first drop of episodes, but this time Harry and Meghan didn't pull any punches.
Everything that's happened to us was always going to happen to us, because if you speak truth to power, that's how they respond.
In the final episodes of the couple's Netflix docuseries, Harry took aim at his brother.
It was terrifying to have my brother scream and shout at me and my father say things that just simply weren't true. And and my grandmother, quietly sit there and sort of take it all in.
The couple sharing their perspective on the royal rift, which, in their words, pushed them out of the fold. It started during their tour of Australia back in 2018. So successful, it created jealousy in the palace, they say.
The issue is when someone who's marrying in, who should be a supporting act, is then stealing the limelight or is doing the job better than the person who was born to do this. That upsets people. It shifts the balance. The palace wasn't going to protect her. Once that happens, the floodgates open.
And I realized that I wasn't just being thrown to the wolves, I was being fed to the wolves.
Meghan says the stress of the media coverage was too much. Last year, saying she didn't want to live anymore.
It's like, all of this will stop if I'm not here. And that was the scariest thing about it, is it was such clear thinking.
But she also suffered physically because of the stress of the worldwide coverage and in British newspapers, including the Daily Mail, which published a letter she wrote to her father.
I believe my wife suffered a miscarriage because of what the Mail did. I watched the whole thing. Now, do we absolutely know that the miscarriage was caused by that? Of course we don't. But bearing in mind the stress that caused, the lack of sleep, and the timing of the pregnancy, how many weeks in she was, I can say from what I saw, that miscarriage was created by what they were trying to do to her.
The family's response? Well, on Thursday, they showed a united front at a planned engagement. And the palace said they had no plans to comment on the series.
New COVID cases in China were exploding well before the government's move to abandon its strict policies, according to the World Health Organization. Beijing essentially dropped the zero COVID measures after mass anti-lockdown protests and is now seeing daily cases in the tens of thousands. But the real number could be far higher as China has dropped mass testing and strict rules around reporting new cases. CNN's Selena Wang reports.
COVID lockdowns are finally over in China, but the irony is that here in Beijing, it still feels like we're stuck in one. Streets are empty, many stores are closed, businesses are struggling to stay open because so many people have COVID. It's spreading extremely fast here in Beijing, and authorities say it's spreading rapidly across the country, but we don't know just how fast. Authorities said they've given up on counting all cases, since there's no way to gauge the number of infections now with people avoiding official tests and staying at home. Here in Beijing, the number of patients going to fever clinics jumped 16 times this Sunday compared to a week before. Authorities also said the number of calls to the emergency hotline have jumped 6 times. So here in China, there isn't a strong primary care system. So it's common to rush to the hospital even for minor illnesses. So it's no surprise we're already seeing long lines forming outside of hospitals. Authorities are now scrambling to increase the number of fever clinics and ICU wards, pledging as well to boost the lagging vaccination rate for the elderly population. The fear from experts I speak to is not how this plays out in Beijing, but the potential devastation that could happen when COVID hits the rural areas with weak medical infrastructure. Take a listen to what Xi Cin, an associate professor at the Yale School of Public Health, had to say.
China has around 2,800 counties. Many counties do not have any ICU beds. And even they have beds, but they do not have medical doctors to serve.
And now people across China are left to fend for themselves. People are rushing to stock up on fever and cold medicine. But interestingly, canned peaches are also flying off the shelves after rumors circulated that canned peaches can treat COVID. In videos that have gone viral on social media, canned peach factories are talking about how they're working overtime to meet demand. One factory said orders had jumped by 10-fold. Searches for canned peaches have surged more than 2,700% on China's search engine Baidu in the past week. It has gotten to the point where state media is now publishing articles stating that the food has no medicinal effect or ability to cure COVID. I spoke to a health expert who said this whole canned peach craze reflects the lack of communication between health authorities and the public, and it shows just how unprepared people feel that they're willing to follow the hype of canned peaches as a home remedy.
Selena Wang reporting. Now, there's been some weird and wonderful ways to increase quality, affordable housing around the world. Now, in the US, an old Navy ship building factory is now being used to build cheap housing complexes. CNN's David Culver reports from California.
This is where the floors of the volumes themselves get built.
Keeping up with Larry Pace,
don't touch it,
is not easy.
Excuse me, fellas.
He moves through the floor of Factory OS.
What are y'all doing?
With a sense of urgency.
All right, come on.
Located just outside San Francisco, this space was first designed to build U.S. Navy submarines.
This place was built for World War II.
8 decades later, it's now transformed to fight a worsening crisis on the American home front.
This is a war we're in. And we're in a war to combat the affordability and the housing crisis.
Factory OS puts home building onto an assembly line and out the door within 2 weeks. These modular units, when combined, create entire apartment buildings. Think sophisticated Legos. Production starts with a high-tech expedited design process. You're looking at the plans for Beacon Landing, an 89-unit affordable housing complex to be built just south of downtown LA. Insulation and drywall, flooring, and even fixtures, all prefabricated right here in the factory.
I mean, does it all work? I would like to think so.
To look down this line and see what we're doing for the community is mind-blowing.
The need? Also overwhelming. In Southern California, look past the glamour of Los Angeles' Hollywood Hills. The tents speak to desperation. According to 2019 figures, the state needed an estimated million more homes just to meet housing demand. Nationally, the home shortage jumped to roughly 3.8 million. That's more than double the number from a decade ago. But it's more than just boosting housing inventory. Inflation, zoning inequalities, also contributing factors as to why people just can't buy homes. To purchase a house in more than 75% of the nation's most populous cities, an average family spends 30% of their income. In cities like Miami, New York, or LA, it surges to more than 80% of an average family's income. It's forced folks to seek other options, from moving into converted garages and smaller units on someone else's property, to expanding a civil rights era approach that helps promote home ownership, particularly among minority groups.
It shouldn't have to be that way where you're going to, have to move so far out of, LA to be able to have a home.
Ixchel Hernandez's family moved here when she was about 4. At one point, they had 6 people crammed into their one-bedroom apartment. Thank God we never fell short on rent, her dad says. But as renters for more than 20 years, they constantly worried about a new landlord wanting to sell the property or raise rent.
Okay.
That is until this year, when the Hernandezes and their neighbors joined a community land trust, or CLT as they're known. A CLT is essentially a nonprofit that buys the land on which a building sits, allowing a community's residents to collectively manage it. Some residents eventually form a co-op and take ownership of their buildings, paying rent for the land.
It may not seem like a lot to a lot of folks that have money or come from money. It's just, we are just as much trying to build that generational wealth.
Today, there are at least 5 community land trusts here in Los Angeles, with more than 200 nationwide and counting. What's important is that we're now owners, her mom says. It was not easy, her dad reminds them.
No.
About an hour's drive south from the Hernandez home, we watched as the modular units arrived from the Bay Area, hoisted from a truck and placed onto a cement foundation, block by block. Affordable housing, coming summer 2023. It's not only the nonprofits trying to help. Factory OS also aiming to ease the housing burden and commute time for its own employees.
Just to be able to I'm going to wake up, I'm going to take a walk down the street and come to work. That's awesome.
The company planning to convert this vacant lot nearby into employer-assisted housing. But to successfully fight the dire housing crisis nationally, Larry believes it'll take corporations and government mobilizing now.
We all need to work on it together, and we can reverse this tide.
The war is not lost.
The war is absolutely not lost.
That is about all we have got time for. Just before we head off, though, we've been talking about Christmas dinners, food, potatoes, and you may have been horrified to see that Australia is facing a potential hot chip shortage. While Chris Claridge from Potatoes New Zealand, he's the CEO, has got in touch to tell us no shortages of fries in New Zealand. Crops are looking good. Growers and chip processors have settled their growing contracts amicably. Looking forward to great potato growing season. Happy Fry, F-R-Y Day. Thank you, Chris, for that. We were going to hit the alert button. Anyway, you can check out anything you missed on Checkpoint on Spotify. Have a wonderful weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Tēnā tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Free-to-air cricket will return to TV screens next year as Spark axes its sports streaming service. It's blaming escalating content rights, COVID disruptions and a failure to get viewers. Teaching leaders say without change, some primary teachers may soon struggle to find a job. The Ministry of Education forecasts up to 1,000 more teachers than jobs next year. The Ukrainian government believes Russia is planning a broad new offensive in the new year.